Emma, a black widow, quietly works in her small diner on a cold Chicago night, wiping down the counter while counting the days until the rent is due. Just then, a weary white man pushes open the door and orders a bowl of hot soup to warm his body and his spirit. But when the time came to pay, he suddenly grew flustered and distraught upon discovering he had left his wallet at home. Without a word of reproach, Emma simply smiles and gently tells him the meal is on the house. That simple moment slips quietly into his heart, unaware that this small act of kindness will soon turn his entire life in a direction he never could have imagined. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The snow fell thick over Chicago that evening, turning Madison Street into a blur of white. Alexander Pierce walked with his hands buried deep in the pockets of a worn-out coat, one he'd deliberately pulled from the back of his closet. At 58, he'd learned that expensive things drew attention, and tonight he wanted to be invisible. His scuffed leather shoes crunched against fresh snow. Each step took him further from the glass towers downtown, further from the corner office on the 42nd floor, where his nameplate read, Alexander Pierce, CEO, Pierce Global Holdings. That world felt like it belonged to someone else tonight. He stopped in front of a small diner. Emma's Kitchen. The sign flickered in faded yellow letters. Through the fogged window, he saw warm light and empty tables. A woman moved inside, wiping down the counter with slow, practiced movements. His stomach twisted with hunger. He couldn't remember his last meal. There'd been meetings, conference calls, more meetings. Just the hollow feeling that had been his constant companion for longer than he cared to admit. The bell chimed as he pushed open the door. Warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of coffee and something savory. The woman behind the counter looked up. She was in her 50s, dark-skinned with silver streaking through her pulled-back hair. Exhaustion lined her face, but when she saw him, she smiled, not the automatic smile of customer service, but something real. "Well, hello there," she said, her voice carrying a warm southern lilt. "Come on in before you freeze to death out there." Alexander brushed snow off his shoulders and glanced around. 6 tables with checkered tablecloths, all empty. Photographs on the walls showed the same woman, younger, standing beside a tall man with kind eyes. "You closing soon?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She waved her hand. "Baby, I'm never too busy for someone who needs a warm meal. Sit wherever you like." He chose a table by the window and settled into the creaking plastic seat. For a moment, he stared at his reflection in the dark glass. The man looking back seemed much older than 58. The woman appeared beside him, notepad ready. "What can I get you tonight, honey?" Alexander scanned the menu card between the salt and pepper shakers. "Just the soup of the day. And water." Her eyebrows rose. "That's it. You sure I make a mean meatloaf, and you look like you could use more than soup." No judgment in her tone, just genuine concern. Something about it made his throat tighten. "The soup's fine, thank you." She studied him briefly, then nodded. "All right then. 1 bowl of my chicken vegetable soup coming right up." Through the serving window, he watched her work in the kitchen, ladling soup from a large pot, grabbing bread from a basket. She hummed while she moved some old gospel tune that filled the quiet spaces of the diner. When she returned, she placed the bowl before him with both hands, almost reverently. Steam rose from golden broth carrying the scent of time and something he couldn't quite name, something like home. "There you go," she said. "Made it fresh this morning. My late husband's recipe." Alexander looked up. "Your husband? Passed 15 years ago." Matter of fact, though her eyes tightened slightly. "But I keep his soup alive. Seems wrong to let good love go to waste, you know." She turned back to the counter before he could respond. Alexander stared down at the bowl. Chunks of chicken carrot celery floating in rich broth. He picked up his spoon. The first taste stopped him cold. It wasn't fancy, nothing like the restaurants where he took clients' places with unpronounceable names and astronomical prices. But damn if it wasn't the best thing he'd tasted in years. Real warmth spread through his chest, different from expensive whiskey or the hollow satisfaction of closed deals. This was human warmth. He ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. Through the serving window, he watched her move around the kitchen, checking the oven, washing dishes. She'd turned on a small radio, soft music played in the background. Halfway through the bowl, Alexander realized his mind had stopped racing. No quarterly reports, no shareholder meetings, no empire weighing on his shoulders. Just this moment, just soup and quiet and snow falling outside. She came back with a coffee pot. How's the soup treating you? It's perfect. He meant it. She smiled, pouring coffee he hadn't asked for. You looked like you needed it. Coffee's on the house. Nobody should drink water on a night like this. Thank you. He wrapped his hands around the warm cup. She leaned against the edge of his table, shifting her weight to one hip. Don't you got family to be with tonight? The question hit harder than it should have. Alexander set down his spoon carefully. No, not really. She didn't push, but her eyes saw everything. She'd probably witnessed every kind of lonely that walked through her door. Well, you got me tonight. And this soup. That's something, isn't it? Alexander looked at her, really looked. No pity in her expression, no judgment, just acknowledgement, just kindness. When was the last time someone had looked at him like that? Not at Alexander Pierce, the billionaire, the CEO, the name in the business section. Just at Alexander, just a man. Yeah, he said quietly. That's something. She patted his shoulder, brief and motherly, then headed back to the kitchen. Alexander finished his soup in silence, soaking up the last of the broth with bread. The clock ticked toward 9. Finally, he set down his spoon and reached for his wallet. His hand found an empty pocket. He tried the other side. Nothing. His inside pocket. Still nothing. Ice flooded his veins. He'd left it at home, on the kitchen counter next to his keys and phone. He'd been so desperate to escape the suffocating silence of his penthouse that he'd walked out with nothing but this old coat. Alexander checked again, more frantically. His hands started shaking. How could he be so careless? So stupid. The woman emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Something in his face must have shown because her smile faded. Everything okay, honey? His voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. I forgot my wallet. I don't have any money. He braced himself for suspicion, anger, the cold calculation that always came when money entered any equation. But she just tilted her head, studying him with those kind eyes. That's all right, she said simply. Alexander blinked. What? I said that's all right. Happens to the best of us. Don't worry about it. No, you don't understand. He fumbled with his watch, a Patek Philippe worth more than most cars. I can leave this. It's valuable. You can hold it until I come back. Stop. Her hand covered his gentle but firm, stopping him mid-motion. Her skin was warm, work-roughened. Put that away. I don't need your watch. But I have to pay you. You don't have to do anything. Her dark eyes held his steady and unwavering. Listen to me. You came in here looking like you'd lost everything that mattered. I gave you a bowl of soup. That's what we do here. We feed people. Not their wallets. People. Alexander stared at her, completely speechless. In his world, nothing was free. Everything had a price strings attached, angles to work. You didn't get something for nothing. Ever. She released his hand and straightened. Tell you what. If it makes you feel better, you can pay me back in a different way. How? Barely a whisper. Next time you see someone worse off than you, someone who needs help, you help them. Use the money you would have spent on this soup and do something good with it. That genuine smile again, the one that seemed to warm the entire diner. That way you'll have paid me back and then some. Deal. Alexander's throat closed completely. When was the last time someone showed him kindness without wanting anything in return, without knowing his name, his net worth, his connections? He genuinely couldn't remember. He swallowed hard. Are you sure? Baby, I'm old enough to know what I'm sure about. She picked up his empty bowl. You get yourself home safe now. She walked away before he could say anything else, disappearing into her kitchen. Alexander sat frozen, staring at the table where the soup had been. Something in his chest felt strange, tight, and loose at the same time, like something long sealed had finally cracked open. Slowly he stood. His legs felt unsteady. At the door, he turned back. She was at the sink, humming that gospel tune again. Warm kitchen light spilled across the checkered floor. Thank you, he called out. She turned, water running over her hands. You're welcome, honey. Come back any time. The bell chimed as he stepped into the cold. Snow was still falling, but the world looked different now. Softer somehow. Alexander walked 3 blocks before he had to stop. He leaned against a lamppost, breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with the winter air. Without warning, tears spilled down his cheeks, hot against frozen skin. 40 years building an empire. Houses he'd never lived in, cars he'd never driven, more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. And yet, this woman who owned nothing but a struggling diner had just given him the most valuable thing he'd received in decades. She'd seen him. Not his portfolio, not his influence. Just him. Alexander pulled his coat tighter and looked back toward Emma's kitchen. The yellow sign flickered in the distance, a small beacon in the winter darkness. He made himself a promise right there he would go back. He would find a way to know this woman who'd offered soup and salvation in the same bowl. What Alexander Pierce didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that this single act of kindness would unravel everything he'd built and give him everything he'd lost. But that night, walking home through falling snow with tears freezing on his face, he felt something he hadn't felt in 30 years. Hope. 3 days passed before Alexander found himself standing outside Emma's kitchen again. He'd told himself he needed to pay for the soup. That was the logical reason, the businesslike reason. But logic had nothing to do with why his hand trembled slightly as he pushed open the door. The bell chimed. Emma looked up from behind the counter, and her face broke into that warm smile. "Well, look who's back. I was wondering if I'd see you again." "I came to pay," Alexander said, pulling out his wallet. "For the soup. And I wanted to." "Put that away." Emma waved her hand dismissively. "I told you we're square, but if you're hungry, I got fresh cornbread in the oven." Alexander hesitated, then slid onto a stool at the counter. "Just coffee then, please." "Coffee and cornbread coming up." She poured him a cup without waiting for confirmation. "You got a name, or should I keep calling you Soup Man in my head?" "Alexander." He wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Alex is fine." "Emma." She extended her hand across the counter. Her grip was firm, honest. "Nice to officially meet you, Alex." Over the next 2 weeks, Alexander became a regular. He'd show up around 7 in the evening after the dinner rush, though rush was generous for the 3 or 4 customers Emma usually served. They'd talk while she cleaned up their conversations, flowing easily in a way that surprised him. One evening, as Alexander helped her wipe down tables, something he'd started doing without asking, Emma paused mid-motion. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What do you do, Alex, for work, I mean?" She studied him with those perceptive eyes. "You got the hands of someone who don't do manual labor, but you dress like you're trying real hard not to look rich." Alexander's cloth stilled on the table surface. "What makes you think I'm rich?" "Baby, I've been running this place for 20 years. I know the difference between someone who's poor and someone who's pretending to be." She smiled gently. "That watch you tried to give me, I looked it up later. Could probably buy this whole building with what that's worth." He should have felt exposed, caught. Instead, he felt relieved. "I'm in business. Investments mostly." "Mostly?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "I run a company, Pierce Global Holdings." He watched her face for recognition, for the shift that always came when people knew. But Emma just nodded slowly. "That's a big name. My daughter mentioned it once they bought out some tech company she admired." She went back to wiping the counter. "Must be lonely at the top of all that." Alexander's throat tightened. "How did you—" "You got that look," Emma said quietly. "Same look my Marcus had sometimes before we opened this place. He worked in finance, made good money, wore expensive suits, came home late every night. Then one day, he looked at me across our fancy dining table and said, 'Baby, I got everything and I got nothing.' 6 months later, we opened this diner." "You gave up financial security for a restaurant?" "We gave up existing for living." Emma poured herself coffee and sat down across from him. "Best decision we ever made." Had 5 beautiful years before his heart gave out. Her voice caught slightly. But those 5 years worth more than 50 years of fancy dinners alone. Alexander stared into his coffee. "I have a son, James. He's 32 now. Runs the European division. You close. We have meetings." The words tasted bitter. "Professional meetings where we discuss quarterly projections and market strategies." He paused. "I can't remember the last time we just talked." Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "It's never too late, Alex. You still breathing? He's still breathing. That's all you need to start." The door opened, bringing in a rush of cold air, and a young woman bundled in a worn winter coat. "Mama, She stopped short, seeing Alexander. "Oh, baby, come here." Emma stood, gesturing her daughter over. "Alex, this is my daughter Grace. Grace, this is Alex. He's been keeping me company these past couple weeks." Grace was in her late 20s, with her mother's warm eyes and a cautious smile. "Nice to meet you." She turned to Emma. "Mama, the landlord called again. He's giving us until the end of the month." Emma's smile faltered for just a second before she caught herself. "We'll figure it out, baby. We always do." "Mama, we're 3 months behind. The bank won't give us another extension and—" Grace glanced at Alexander, clearly uncomfortable discussing this in front of a stranger. "Grace," Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "Not now. Go on in the back and grab those pies I made. You can take one home to Marcus Jr." After Grace disappeared into the kitchen, Emma sat back down heavily. The fatigue Alexander had noticed that first night seemed more pronounced now. "How bad is it?" he asked quietly. Emma laughed, but it was a tired sound. "You want the truth? I'm about $4,000 from losing everything. The building owner wants to sell to some developer, and unless I can pay off my back rent and buy the property, Emma's kitchen becomes a memory." She met his eyes. "But you know what I've been broke before. I'll survive." Alexander's mind was already running calculations. $4,000. He spent more than that on a single business dinner. He could write a check right now, solve this problem in 30 seconds. But he saw the pride in Emma's shoulders, the dignity in how she held her head high despite everything. A check would help her financially and wound her in every other way that mattered. "Let me help," he said carefully. "Not with money. Let me invest in the restaurant. As a business partner. Alex, hear me out." He leaned forward. "You know the food industry, I know business. We could expand, maybe add a catering service, update the equipment. You'd maintain full creative control. I'd just handle the financial side." Emma shook her head slowly. "That's real sweet, but I can't take your charity dressed up as business." "It's not charity." Alexander pulled out his phone, showing her his company's investment portfolio. "I've built a career on recognizing valuable opportunities. Emma, this place has something money can't buy. It has heart. It has community. People don't come here just for food. They come because you make them feel seen." He paused. "You made me feel seen." She studied him for a long moment. "This really about business, Alex, or you trying to buy your way into meaning something?" The question landed like a physical blow. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe both. But I do know that sitting in this diner, talking to you, wiping down tables, it's the first time in 30 years I've felt like a person instead of a profit margin." Flashback 1. Alexander, the price of everything. Emma's words stirred something in Alexander's memory, pulling him back 20 years. The Pierce Global Holdings boardroom, 11 p.m. Alexander younger, but already carrying that weight in his eyes, signed document after document. His phone buzzed Jennifer's 5th call. He sent it to voicemail again. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Pierce, your wife called. She said it's your son's birthday." "I know." Alexander didn't look up from the contracts. "Tell her I'll be home in an hour." But 1 hour became 3. When he finally walked into his penthouse at 2 a.m., the birthday cake sat untouched on the marble counter. Jennifer was asleep in bed, or pretending to be. In James's room, his 7-year-old son lay sprawled across his bed, still in his party clothes. On the nightstand sat a wrapped box, wrapping paper, crooked tape everywhere. The tag read, "To Daddy Love James." Inside was a drawing in crayon. 2 stick figures holding hands. The taller one had "Daddy" written above it in uneven letters. The smaller one, "Me." Alexander had picked up that drawing, meaning to put it on his desk to look at it every day. Instead, it had ended up in a drawer, then a box, then storage. He'd never opened his son's gift. Alexander blinked, finding himself back in Emma's kitchen. She was watching him with those knowing eyes. "You just went somewhere," she said softly. "My son gave me a birthday present once. I never opened it." The confession came out before he could stop it. "I told myself I'd get to it later when I had time. That was 25 years ago." Emma's hand found his again. "You still got time now." Before Alexander could respond, Grace emerged from the kitchen with 3 boxed pies. She paused, seeing her mother holding a stranger's hand. "Mama, you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." Emma squeezed Alexander's hand once more before releasing it. "Better than fine, actually." After Grace left, Emma turned back to Alexander. "This investment idea of yours, I got conditions." Hope flickered in his chest. "Name them." "First, nothing changes about the soul of this place. We still feed people who can't pay. We still use Marcus's recipes. We still treat every customer like family." "Agreed." "Second, you don't go throwing money around to make me feel small. We're partners, equal partners, or we're nothing." "Fair enough." "And third," Emma's eyes grew serious, "you promise me you're doing this for the right reasons. Not to buy meaning, not to ease guilt, but because you actually believe in what we're building here." Alexander met her gaze steadily. "I've spent 40 years making money, Emma. I'm very good at it. But I've never once built something that mattered to actual people, something that made them feel less alone." He paused. You do that every single day. Yes, I believe in it. And yes, I want to be part of it. Emma stood up, extending her hand formally across the counter. Then, welcome aboard, partner. They shook on it, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Alexander felt like he'd made a decision that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with being human. Over the next week, they worked out the details. Alexander brought in his lawyers, much to Emma's intimidation, but insisted on contracts that gave her final say on all creative decisions. He paid off her back rent and bought the building outright, putting it in both their names. Alex, this is too much, Emma protested when she saw the deed. It's protection, he countered, for both of us. This way, neither of us can sell without the other's agreement. The restaurant stays exactly what it's meant to be. One evening after they'd signed all the paperwork, Emma pulled out a bottle of wine from under the counter. Marcus saved this for special occasions. Never found one special enough. She poured them each a glass. Feels right now. They toasted to new beginnings. As they talked late into the night about her late husband, about his estranged family, about dreams deferred, and second chances, Alexander realized something that terrified him. He was falling for her. Not the dramatic, consuming passion of youth. Something deeper. Something that felt like coming home. Emma, he said suddenly, can I ask you something? You just did, she smiled, but go ahead, ask another. Why me? Why trust me with all this? She considered the question seriously. You remember that first night when you tried to give me that expensive watch? Yes. Most folks in your position, they'd have gotten angry, demanded to speak to the manager, threatened to call the police. Emma swirled her wine. But you looked ashamed. Like you'd failed some test you didn't know you were taking. She met his eyes. That told me everything. You got money, Alex, but you ain't forgotten what it means to need something you can't buy. What's that? Grace. She said it simply. Not my daughter, though I named her that for a reason. I mean actual grace. Kindness without deserving it. Love without earning it. Emma reached across and touched his cheek gently. You've been earning everything your whole life. Sometimes it's okay to just receive. Alexander felt tears prick his eyes. This woman barely knew him, yet she saw straight through to the core of him, to the lonely boy who'd worked himself half to death, trying to prove he was worth something. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For the soup. For the grace. For seeing me. Emma smiled, and in that smile was something that made Alexander's heart ache with possibility. 2 months into their partnership, Emma's kitchen was thriving. Alexander had kept his promise. Nothing about the soul of the place changed, but they'd updated the equipment, expanded the menu slightly, and started a small catering business. The diner now buzzed with customers during lunch and dinner. Emma glowed with pride every time she looked around at the full tables. You did this, she'd tell Alexander. We did this, he'd correct her. Their relationship had evolved into something neither quite named, but both felt. Alexander still showed up every evening, but now he'd roll up his sleeves and work the dinner shift beside her. He learned to pour coffee without spilling, to remember regulars' orders, to chat with customers about their lives. One evening, after closing, Emma sat down heavily in a chair. Lord, my feet are killing me. Without thinking, Alexander knelt down and started unlacing her practical work shoes. Here, let me. Alex, what are you? Hush. He slipped off her shoes and began massaging her feet gently. You've been on them for 12 hours. Emma stared down at him, this man in his expensive casual clothes kneeling on the floor of her diner, rubbing her tired feet, and something shifted in her chest. You know what you look like right now? What? Like you belong here. Her voice was soft. Like you've always belonged here. Alexander looked up at her, and the tenderness in his eyes made her breath catch. Maybe I have. I just didn't know it until I walked through that door 3 months ago. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Alexander's hands stilled on her feet. Emma leaned forward slowly. Their faces were inches apart when her phone rang, shattering the moment. She pulled back, laughing nervously. Probably Grace checking on me. She answered, Hello, oh. Yes, this is Emma. Wait, what, tomorrow? But yes, of course. Thank you. She hung up, looking dazed. Everything okay? Alexander stood up, concerned. That was your assistant. She said you wanted me to come to your office tomorrow at 10. Emma's voice held a question. What's this about Alex? Alexander's stomach dropped. He hadn't called his assistant, which meant, oh God, Jennifer. His ex-wife still had connections at the company, still received courtesy updates. She must have found out about Emma. I didn't set up any meeting, he said carefully. Then why would understanding dawned on Emma's face? Someone's checking up on you. On us. Probably. Alexander ran his hand through his hair. Emma, you don't have to go. Will it cause you trouble if I don't? I don't care if it does. She studied him. You mean that, don't you? Yes. Emma stood up, straightening her shoulders. Then I'll go. I got nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. She paused. But Alex, maybe you should tell me what I'm walking into. So he did. He told her about Pierce Global Holdings, about the board of directors who scrutinized his every move, about Jennifer, who still served on the board despite their divorce. He told her about the expectations, the judgment, the world where people were valued by their net worth and connections. You're giving me a chance to back out, Emma said quietly. I'm giving you the full picture. And if I walk into that building tomorrow, into your world, what changes? Everything, Alexander admitted, and nothing. The board might have opinions. The press might write articles. People will talk. About you dating a black woman who runs a diner. The bluntness of it made him flinch. Yes. And that scares you? No. He took her hands. What scares me is you getting hurt by all of it. What scares me is you walking into that building and realizing I'm not worth the hassle. Emma laughed a real laugh that filled the diner with warmth. Baby, I survived losing my husband, raising a daughter alone, and keeping this place running on prayers and pennies. You think some fancy building gonna scare me off? The next morning, Emma stood in front of her closet staring at her limited options. Everything looked wrong, too casual, too old, too poor. She settled on her best church dress, simple navy blue, with a modest neckline. Grace appeared in the doorway. Mama, you sure about this? No. Emma fastened her grandmother's pearl earrings. But I'm going anyway. He's a billionaire, Mama. That's a whole different world. He's Alex, Emma corrected gently. He's the man who washes dishes in my kitchen and makes terrible jokes and remembers how I take my coffee. She turned to face her daughter. The money's just noise. But standing in the lobby of Pierce Tower an hour later, the noise felt deafening. The building stretched 50 stories above her, all glass and steel and wealth. Her reflection in the polished marble looked small out of place. A security guard approached, eyeing her suspiciously. Can I help you? His tone suggested she needed to leave. I have a meeting. 10 o'clock. Name. Emma Harris. He checked his tablet, and his entire demeanor shifted. Oh, Miss Harris. My apologies. He gestured toward the elevators. 42nd floor. Someone will meet you there. The elevator ride felt endless. Emma watched the numbers climb, her heart climbing with them. The doors opened to a reception area that probably cost more than her entire restaurant. The receptionist, a young woman in a designer suit, smiled professionally. Miss Harris, right this way, please. They walked down a hallway, lined with photographs of Alexander at various corporate events, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. In every photo, he wore the same practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Emma didn't recognize him. The receptionist opened a door to a conference room. Please wait here. Mr. Pierce will be with you shortly. The door closed, leaving Emma alone in a room dominated by a massive table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. She felt like she was standing in the sky. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Emma was considering leaving when the door opened, but it wasn't Alexander. The woman who entered was in her early 60s, impeccably dressed in a cream Chanel suit. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Miss Harris. The woman extended a manicured hand. I'm Jennifer Pierce, Alexander's ex-wife. Emma shook her hand, noting the firm grip designed to intimidate. Nice to meet you. Please sit. Jennifer took a seat across from her, folding her hands on the table. I apologize for the deception. Alexander doesn't know you're here. I figured as much. You're direct. I appreciate that. Jennifer smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes either. Let me be equally direct. How much do you want? Emma blinked. Excuse me. To walk away. From Alexander, from whatever this is. Jennifer pulled out a checkbook. Name your price. I'll write it right now. For a moment, Emma couldn't breathe. The insult of it, the casual cruelty, hit her like a slap. You think I'm with Alex for money? I think you're a struggling business owner who got very lucky when a billionaire walked into your restaurant. Jennifer's voice was reasonable, almost kind. There's no shame in it, but let's not pretend this is some fairy tale romance. Emma stood up. I'm leaving. Please. Jennifer's voice sharpened. Sit down. There's more you need to understand. Against her better judgment, Emma sat. Jennifer pulled out a tablet, pulling up articles and photographs. Do you know what happened to Alexander's stock price when news of your relationship leaked last week? It dropped 3%. That's nearly $500 million in shareholder value. She swiped to another article, and this an editorial questioning whether Alexander's judgment has become compromised. 3 board members have called for a review of his position as CEO. Emma stared at the articles, her stomach churning. I'm not telling you this to be cruel, Jennifer continued. I'm telling you because you seem like a good person, Emma. And good people don't want to watch someone they care about destroy everything they've built. Alex can make his own choices? Can he? Jennifer leaned forward. Or is he going through some midlife crisis trying to find meaning by playing at being ordinary? She paused. You said you care about him. If that's true, ask yourself, is being with you really what's best for him? Or are you the emotional equivalent of that bowl of soup temporary comfort that won't sustain him long term? The words landed like poison, seeping into every doubt Emma had tried to suppress. She looked at her reflection in the table's polished surface, her simple dress, her work-worn hands. What was she doing here? I loved Alexander once, Jennifer said quietly. Part of me still does. I watched him build this empire from nothing, sacrificing everything, including our marriage, to make it work. And now I'm watching him tear it down for... She gestured vaguely. For what, a soup kitchen? It's a restaurant, Emma said weakly. It's a fantasy. Jennifer's voice turned gentle, which somehow made it worse. You're his escape from reality, but reality doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. Eventually, he'll have to choose this empire or this fantasy. And when he does, where will that leave you? Emma stood again, her legs shaking. I need to go. Think about what I said. Jennifer didn't try to stop her this time. You seem like a woman who's known real love, the kind that sacrifices for the other person's good. If you love Alexander, maybe the most loving thing you can do is let him go before you both get hurt. Emma walked to the elevator on autopilot, rode down 42 floors in silence, stepped out into the Chicago afternoon feeling like she'd aged 10 years. She pulled out her phone and called Grace. Baby, can you cover the dinner shift tonight? Mama, what's wrong? You sound. I just need tonight. Please. Of course, Mama. Emma hung up. She walked for hours, Jennifer's words echoing in her head. $500 million, board review, crisis of judgment, temporary comfort. By the time she got home, she'd made a decision that felt like swallowing glass. Alexander called 17 times that evening. Emma didn't answer. At midnight, someone knocked on her apartment door. She knew it was him before she opened it. He stood in her hallway, still in his suit, looking frantic. Emma, what happened? Jennifer told me you came to the office, but she said you left upset and... Come in. Emma stepped back. We need to talk. Alexander walked in slowly, taking in her small apartment, so different from his penthouse. Photos of Grace at various ages covered the walls. The furniture was old, but clean. Everything spoke of a life built on love rather than money. What did Jennifer say to you? He asked. The truth. Emma sat on her worn couch. That being with me is costing you everything. I don't care about $500 million, Alex. Board reviews, questions about your judgment. Emma's voice cracked. I won't be the reason you lose everything you've built. You're not listening. Alexander knelt in front of her, taking her hands. I spent 40 years building an empire that left me so empty I forgot what it felt like to be human. Then you gave me a bowl of soup and reminded me. His eyes were fierce. Everything I built means nothing if I'm miserable. You don't get that yet, but you're not taking something from me. You're giving me everything that matters. Your ex-wife still loves you. Jennifer loves the idea of who I was supposed to be, Alexander said. She never loved who I actually am. And who are you? I'm still figuring that out. He squeezed her hands. But I know I'm happier washing dishes in your restaurant than I ever was in that boardroom. Emma wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to, but doubt had taken root. What if this is just a phase? What if 6 months from now you wake up and realize you've given up your entire world for a woman who can't even match your socks to your outfit? Alexander laughed, actually laughed. Emma, I've had color-coordinated socks for 30 years. They didn't make me happy. You make me happy. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. He stood up, pulling her with him. Come with me. Where? Shopping. Right now. Alex, it's midnight. I know a place that's open. He was already grabbing her coat. Please, trust me. 20 minutes later, they stood in an upscale boutique that had opened specially for Alexander's call. The owner, used to accommodating wealthy clients at odd hours, didn't even blink. "Pick anything you want," Alexander told Emma. She felt overwhelmed by racks of designer clothes with price tags that made her dizzy. "Alex, I don't need. I know you don't need it." He gently guided her toward a section of coats. "But I want to give you something. Not because I'm trying to change you, but because I want to see you smile." Emma's fingers brushed against a red wool coat, deep crimson, beautifully tailored. She'd never owned anything red. It seemed too bold, too attention-seeking for someone like her. "Try it on," Alexander urged. The coat fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her. Emma looked at herself in the three-way mirror. The woman looking back stood taller, bolder. The color brought out warmth in her skin, confidence in her posture. "You look beautiful," Alexander said softly. "I look different. You look like yourself." He stood behind her, meeting her eyes in the mirror, the self you've been hiding under practical colors and modest cuts. "Emma, you spend so much time taking care of everyone else. Let me take care of you for once." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "What if I can't fit into your world? Then we'll make a new world." He turned her around to face him. "One that fits both of us." They bought the coat. Emma wore it out of the store, and for the first time in months, she felt something shift. Maybe Jennifer was right about the challenges. Maybe this was complicated and messy and potentially disastrous, but maybe it was also worth fighting for. "Take me to meet your son," Emma said suddenly. Alexander froze. "What?" "You heard me. If we're doing this, really doing this, I need to meet your family, and you need to try to rebuild what you lost with James." Fear crossed Alexander's face. "Emma, I haven't had a real conversation with my son in 15 years. "Then it's time to start." She took his hand. "You can't move forward while you're still carrying all that backward." A week later, Alexander stood outside his son's brownstone in Lincoln Park, Emma beside him in her red coat. His hand shook as he rang the doorbell. James opened the door, surprise flickering across his face. "Dad, what are you doing here? We don't have a meeting scheduled." He stopped seeing Emma. "James, this is Emma Harris. Emma, my son James." Alexander's voice was strained. "Can we come in? I know it's unexpected, but I'd like to talk." "Not about business, just talk." James studied them both, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stepped back. "Sure, come in." The brownstone was impeccably decorated, expensive but impersonal, like a hotel suite. James offered them coffee, maintaining perfect corporate politeness. "So," James said, sitting across from them, "this is about the board concerns." "No." Alexander took a breath. "This is about me being a terrible father and wanting to see if it's too late to change that." James's coffee cup paused halfway to his mouth. "I'm sorry, what?" "I missed your childhood." Alexander continued, the words coming faster now. "I missed birthdays and school plays and everything that mattered because I told myself I was building something important. But I built it at the expense of you, of your mother, of anything resembling a real life." He paused. "And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry." The silence stretched out. James set down his cup carefully. "Why now? Why after 30 years? "Because Emma reminded me what matters." Alexander looked at her, then back at his son. "And because I don't want to die, having never really known you." James's composure cracked slightly. "You have a funny way of showing it. You've been so busy with your restaurant venture that you've missed the last 3 board meetings." "I'm stepping down from the board," Alexander said. James's eyes went wide. "I'm recommending you for CEO." "Dad, let me finish." Alexander leaned forward. "You've earned it, James. You're brilliant at what you do. Better than I ever was, actually. You understand the business and the people, something I never managed." He paused. "But I don't want you to make my mistakes. Don't let the company consume you. Don't wake up at 58 realizing you've never actually lived." James stood abruptly, walking to the window. His shoulders were tense. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Do you know what it was like growing up as Alexander Pierce's son? Everyone expected me to be you, to want what you wanted, to sacrifice everything for the almighty Pierce Global Holdings." "I know." "No, you don't." James turned around. "You don't know what it was like to compete with a company for my own father's attention and always lose. You don't know what it was like to be 7 years old, waiting in my birthday clothes for you to come home and falling asleep alone because you were closing some deal. The drawing, that damn drawing in the box." Alexander felt like he couldn't breathe. "You're right," he whispered. "I don't know, but I want to. If you'll let me try." James looked at Emma. "And you? How do you fit into all this?" Emma stood, meeting his eyes calmly. I don't know yet, but I know your father is trying to become a better man. That takes courage." She paused. "I lost my husband 15 years ago. And the one thing I learned is that time with people you love is the only currency that matters. Your father's finally figured that out. The question is, are you willing to give him a chance to prove it?" James was quiet for a long moment. "Then, there's a box in my storage unit. It has a drawing I made when I was 7. For your birthday." He met Alexander's eyes. "Did you ever even open it?" "No." Alexander's voice broke, "and I've regretted it every day since I realized what I'd done." "It's a picture of us," James said quietly, "holding hands. I drew it because I wanted us to be close." His eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I still have it because I never stopped wanting that." Alexander crossed the room and pulled his son into a hug, the first real embrace they'd shared in decades. James resisted for a moment, then his arms came up holding on tight. "I'm sorry," Alexander murmured against his son's shoulder. "I'm so sorry." They stood like that for a long time, years of distance finally beginning to close. When they finally pulled apart, James wiped his eyes roughly. "So, a restaurant, huh?" Emma laughed. "Best soup in Chicago. You should come by sometime." "I'd like that." James managed a small smile. "Fair warning, though, I'm a terrible cook." "That's okay," Emma said warmly. "We're pretty good teachers." They stayed for another hour, the conversation gradually becoming less heavy. James asked about the restaurant, about Emma's daughter, about their plans. Alexander watched his son engage with real curiosity rather than corporate courtesy, and something in his chest loosened. As they were leaving, James hugged his father again. "Don't be a stranger, okay? Maybe we could do dinner. A real dinner, not a business meeting." "I'd love that," Alexander said. Walking to the car, Emma slipped her arm through Alexander's. "That was brave." "That was terrifying." "Same thing sometimes." She squeezed his arm. "I'm proud of you." Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. Right there on the snowy sidewalk, he kissed her a soft, certain kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings. "I'm falling in love with you," he said when they pulled apart. Emma smiled, her red coat bright against the winter gray. "Good, because I'm already there." For 6 weeks, Alexander and Emma existed in a bubble of cautious happiness. He'd officially announced his transition out of the CEO role, with James taking over operational leadership. The business press had a field day speculating about his relationship with Emma. His shocking career changed the mysterious diner owner who'd captured a billionaire's heart. They ignored it all. Alexander worked shifts at Emma's kitchen, learning to make Marcus's soup recipe under Emma's patient guidance. Grace warmed to him gradually, especially after he spent an entire afternoon helping her fix the ancient dishwasher without once mentioning he could just buy a new one. But underneath the happiness, Emma felt it awaiting, like the moment before thunder when the air turns electric and strange. She told herself she was being paranoid, that Jennifer's words had planted seeds of doubt that didn't need to grow. She was in the kitchen one Tuesday afternoon prepping vegetables for the dinner rush when the door chimed. Emma glanced up to see Jennifer Pierce walking in, dressed in an elegant camel coat and carrying a leather portfolio. "Miss Harris." Jennifer's smile was pleasant, professional. "Do you have a moment?" Emma's hand stilled on the cutting board. "I'm pretty busy." "This won't take long." Jennifer slid onto a stool at the counter. "I actually came to apologize. Our last conversation was inappropriate. I let my feelings cloud my judgment." "Okay." Emma didn't trust this sudden graciousness. "I've been doing some thinking since then," Jennifer continued, "and I've realized you genuinely care about Alexander. That's rare. Most people just see the money." She paused. "So I wanted to show you something. Not to change your mind, but because you deserve to know the full picture." She opened the portfolio, pulling out several printed articles and setting them on the counter. "These are from the past month. Financial press mostly." Emma wiped her hands and picked up the first article. The headline read, "Pierce Global Holdings stock continues decline amid leadership concerns." 3% became 5%, Jennifer said quietly, then 7%. As of yesterday, Pierce Global has lost nearly $1 billion in market value. The next article, investors question Alexander Pierce's judgment following abrupt career change. Board members are being pressured by shareholders. Jennifer continued, "Not about James's capabilities, he's brilliant, but about the optics of Alexander's departure. It looks erratic, unstable." Emma picked up the third article and her blood ran cold. It was from a tabloid, not the business press. The headline, "Billionaire's Midlife Crisis. Alexander Pierce trades corner office for soup kitchen romance. Below was a photo Alexander in an apron, laughing as he served soup to a customer. Someone had snapped it through the restaurant window. The serious investors might ignore that, Jennifer said, but the public perception that affects brand value, that affects government contracts, that affects everything Pierce Global has spent 40 years building. Why are you showing me this? Emma's voice shook. Because I want you to understand what loving Alexander means. Jennifer's expression was almost sympathetic. It's not just about you two. Every decision he makes ripples outward, affecting thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of shareholders, entire communities that depend on Pierce Global contracts. She pulled out another document, financial projections. If the stock decline continues at this rate, Pierce Global will lose its position in the S&P 500 within 6 months. James will have to make massive cuts. Chicago headquarters alone employs 1,500 people. Emma stared at the numbers, feeling sick. I'm not blaming you, Jennifer said softly, but I need you to understand the stakes. This isn't just about whether Alexander is happy washing dishes. It's about whether his pursuit of personal happiness destroys everything he built and everyone who depends on it. He said he doesn't care about the money. He doesn't. But should he? Jennifer leaned forward. Is it noble to abandon 1,500 employees because you've decided corporate responsibility is too stressful? Is it fair to let thousands of shareholders lose their investments because you found a new hobby? The words hit like physical blows. Emma had been so focused on Alexander's personal journey, his healing, his happiness. She hadn't thought about the wider implications. What do you want from me? Emma asked. I want you to ask yourself a hard question. Jennifer stood, gathering her papers. If loving Alexander means watching him destroy his legacy and hurt all these people, is that really love or is it selfishness? She left a business card on the counter. That's my private number. If you ever want to talk, really talk, not as adversaries, but as two women who both care about Alexander's well-being, call me. Jennifer left as quietly as she'd arrived. Emma stood alone in her kitchen, staring at the articles spread across the counter. The photo of Alexander in his apron seemed to mock her. He looked so happy, so free. But at what cost? That evening, Emma couldn't focus. She burned a batch of soup, something she hadn't done in 15 years. Served the wrong order to 3 different tables. Alexander noticed immediately. Hey! He caught her hand as she rushed past. What's wrong? Nothing. Just tired. Emma. He pulled her into the small office, closing the door. Talk to me. She wanted to tell him about Jennifer's visit, about the articles and the numbers and the guilt crushing her chest. But looking at his face, so open, so trusting, she couldn't. I'm fine, she lied. Really, just one of those days. Alexander studied her, unconvinced, but letting it go. Okay, but I'm here when you're ready to talk. After closing, Emma sent him home early. She needed time to think. Alone in the quiet restaurant, she pulled out Jennifer's articles again, reading them more carefully. One quote from an anonymous board member stood out. Alexander Pierce built this company on discipline and rational decision-making. His recent choices suggest neither. As fiduciaries, we have to question whether personal instability is affecting corporate judgment. Emma looked around her restaurant. The place Marcus had built with love and hope. She'd nearly lost it until Alexander saved it. But saving it had cost him so much more than money. She thought about Grace, about the life she'd built for her daughter through sheer determination. She thought about all the customers who came here, not just for food, but for community, for acceptance. This place mattered. But did it matter more than 1,500 jobs, more than billions in shareholder value, more than Alexander's entire legacy? Emma pulled out her phone and stared at Jennifer's business card for a long time. Then she made a decision that felt like dying. She didn't call Jennifer. Instead, she started packing. When Alexander arrived at the restaurant the next morning for the early shift, Emma wasn't there. Grace was opening, looking confused. She left before dawn, Grace said. Said she had to take care of something, and I should cover for her. Unease prickled Alexander's spine. Did she say when she'd be back? No. Grace handed him a note. But she left this for you. Alexander's hands shook as he unfolded the paper. Alex, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not far, just back to my old apartment in the neighborhood where I grew up. I need some space to think, and I need you not to come after me. These past few months have been the most beautiful of my life. You've reminded me what it feels like to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. But Jennifer showed me something yesterday that I can't ignore. Your choices affect more than just us. They affect thousands of people who depend on Pierce Global. I won't be the reason you destroy everything you built. I won't watch you sacrifice your son's future, your employees' livelihoods, your entire legacy, because I made you feel less lonely. You say I gave you meaning, but baby, I think you were looking for an escape, and I was selfish enough to let you escape because it made me feel special. But we both deserve better than that. I'm keeping the restaurant partnership because you insisted the contract's protected and because this place does matter. But I'm stepping back from us, from whatever this was becoming. Please don't hate me for this, and please don't waste what you've built trying to prove something to me. Go back to your world. Be the man your son needs you to be. Be the leader those 1,500 employees need. And maybe one day, if our paths cross again when the timing's better, we can have that conversation. But not now. Now I'm just the woman who served you soup and accidentally made you forget who you were supposed to be. Emma Alexander read the letter 3 times, feeling his world crumble. She was gone. She'd walked away to save him from himself. The irony was she'd done exactly what he'd spent 40 years doing, sacrificing personal happiness for perceived responsibility. And he'd never felt more lost in his life. For 3 days, Alexander respected Emma's request. He didn't call, didn't show up at her apartment, didn't try to change her mind. Instead, he threw himself back into Pierce Global with an intensity that alarmed everyone around him. He reinstated himself to the board, took back operational control of the Chicago headquarters, started working 16-hour days, reviewing every contract, every decision James had made in his absence. James watched this regression with growing concern. "Dad, what are you doing?" "Fixing what I broke," Alexander said without looking up from his laptop. "You didn't break anything. The stock will recover. These things are temporary." 1,500 jobs, James, billions in shareholder value. That's not temporary. That's real people's lives. And what about your life? James closed the laptop, forcing his father to look at him. What about Emma? She made her choice. Did she? Or did someone make it for her? James had done his own investigating. Jennifer's been very active lately. Lots of private meetings with board members' shareholders. Funny how all these concerns about your judgment started circulating right after you went public with Emma. Alexander's jaw tightened. It doesn't matter. The damage is done. So you're just going to go back to the way things were. Alone in this office, married to a company that can't love you back. It's what I'm good at. It's what's killing you. James's voice rose. I watched you become human again these past few months. I watched you smile, really smile for the first time in my entire life. And now you're going to throw that away because Mom manipulated some stock prices and planted some stories. Your mother's trying to protect the company. My mother's trying to punish you for moving on. James sat down, forcing calm into his voice. Dad, do you love Emma? The question hung in the air. Alexander looked at his son, really looked, and saw genuine concern. When had James started caring about his personal life? Yes, Alexander admitted quietly. I love her. Then why are you here instead of fighting for her? Because she's right. Because being with me costs too much. Because I'm tired of everyone I care about having to sacrifice because of who I am. James was quiet for a moment. Then, can I tell you something I've never said out loud? Of course. I hate Pierce Global Holdings. The words came out flat, certain. I'm good at running it. Maybe even better than you were. But I hate it. It's a prison dressed up as legacy. Alexander felt like he'd been punched. Then why? Because it's what you wanted, what you sacrificed everything for. I thought if I could excel at it, maybe you'd finally see me. Finally be proud. James laughed bitterly. Took me 30 years to realize you were never going to see me because you couldn't even see yourself. James, the only time you became real was when you were with Emma. When you weren't performing as Alexander Pierce, captain of industry. You were just Dad. Just Alex. Just a man trying to figure out what mattered. James leaned forward. That's who I want to know. Not this corporate ghost. Alexander stared at his son, feeling foundations crack inside him. I don't know how to be that person full-time. Neither did Emma, probably. But she tried. She put on that red coat and walked into your world, even though it terrified her. James paused. The question is, are you brave enough to walk back into hers? That night, Alexander sat alone in his penthouse, the same penthouse where he'd lived for 20 years, where every surface was expensive and nothing felt like home. He looked around at the abstract art, the designer furniture, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their million-dollar views. All of it felt like a museum, like he was living in someone else's life. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. Most were corporate events, board meetings, ribbon cuttings. Then he found one Grace had taken at the restaurant, Emma and Alexander standing behind the counter, both in aprons, both laughing at some forgotten joke. Emma's red coat hung on the hook behind them. In that photo, Alexander looked alive. He thought about Emma's letter, about her sacrifice, about how she'd walked away to save him from destroying his legacy. But what was his legacy, really? Alexander walked to his study and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a box of personal items he'd never properly sorted. He rifled through until he found what he was looking for, a small wrapped package, the paper yellowed with age tape browning. James's birthday present from 25 years ago. His hands shook as he carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a child's drawing exactly as James had described, 2 stick figures holding hands, Daddy and me, written in uneven letters above their heads. At the bottom, in James's childhood scrawl, I love you even when you're not here. Alexander sat on the floor of his study and wept, great racking sobs that came from somewhere deep and broken inside him. He'd spent 40 years building towers of glass and steel, amassing wealth and power and influence, and he'd missed everything that mattered. The empire he'd built hadn't made him happy. It had made him successful. There was a difference, a huge difference, and it had taken a bowl of soup and a woman's gentle kindness to show him. Emma had walked away because she thought his legacy was Pierce Global Holdings. She thought 1,500 jobs and shareholder value and corporate reputation were what defined him. But she was wrong. His real legacy was sitting in James's apartment, finally having real conversations with his son. His real legacy was the smile on a customer's face when they walked into Emma's kitchen and felt welcomed. His real legacy was learning that washing dishes beside someone you loved mattered more than any board meeting. Emma had taught him that. And then she'd sacrifice their happiness because she thought the lesson wasn't enough. Alexander stood up, James's drawing still clutched in his hand. He looked around his penthouse one last time at the trappings of success that had never once made him feel successful. Then he made a decision. The next morning, Alexander walked into the Pierce Global boardroom where an emergency meeting had been called. Jennifer sat at the far end of the table, flanked by 3 board members who'd been most vocal about concerns regarding his leadership. Alexander, Jennifer's voice was coolly professional. Thank you for coming. We need to discuss the transition plan. I'm resigning, Alexander said, effective immediately. Shocked silence. Then everyone started talking at once. You can't just... We need orderly transition. The shareholders will. Alexander held up his hand. James is more than capable of running this company. Better than I ever was, actually. He understands people, not just profits. He'll take Pierce Global into the future while respecting its foundation. This is highly irregular. One board member began. So was building this company from nothing. Alexander cut in. So was every major decision I've made that actually mattered. He looked directly at Jennifer. I spent 40 years thinking this company was my legacy, but I was wrong. Alexander, don't be rash, Jennifer started. I'm not being rash. I'm being clear for the first time in my life, he stood. My legacy isn't in this boardroom, or in stock prices, or in quarterly reports. It's in my son learning to prioritize people over profit. It's in a small restaurant that feeds people's souls along with their bodies. It's in finally understanding that you can't buy meaning, you have to build it one real moment at a time. He pulled out a folder of documents. These are my formal resignation papers. My shares are being transferred to a trust managed by James. I'm retaining only enough to live comfortably, and my partnership in Emma's kitchen, which is non-negotiable. You're making a massive mistake, Jennifer said, her composure finally cracking. Maybe. Alexander met her eyes. But it's my mistake to make. For 40 years, I let this company make my decisions for me. Let it consume my marriage, my relationship with my son, any chance at real happiness. He paused. Not anymore. And what will you do? One of the board members asked. You've been CEO for 40 years. Who are you without this company? Alexander smiled, a real smile, the kind he'd learned from Emma. I guess I'm about to find out. He walked out of the boardroom and didn't look back. In the elevator down, his phone buzzed. A text from James. Proud of you, Dad. Go get her. Alexander stepped out onto the street into the cold Chicago morning. He had no idea if Emma would even talk to him. No idea if she'd forgive him for taking so long to understand. No idea if it was too late. But for the first time in 40 years, he knew exactly where he belonged. And it wasn't in a tower. It was in a small diner with checkered tablecloths where a woman in a red coat had taught him what it meant to be human. Snow was falling again when Alexander stood outside Emma's kitchen 3 days later. Through the window, he could see her moving behind the counter slower than usual, her shoulders carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. The lunch rush had ended, leaving only 2 customers lingering over coffee. He'd rehearsed what to say 100 times. None of it felt right. The bell chimed as he pushed open the door. Emma looked up, and for a split second her face showed everything: relief, pain, longing, fear. Then she shuddered it all away. "Alex," her voice was carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I came for lunch." He sat at the same table where he'd eaten that first bowl of soup. "If that's okay." Emma's hands gripped the counter edge. "You shouldn't be here." "Probably not. But here I am anyway." He met her eyes. "I'm not leaving until you hear me out. So you can either feed me while I talk or watch me sit here hungry. Your choice." The 2 customers glanced between them with obvious interest. Emma sighed. "Fine. What do you want?" "Soup. Whatever you're making today." "We're out of soup." "Then I'll wait while you make some." Emma's jaw tightened. She disappeared into the kitchen without another word. Alexander sat quietly, listening to the sounds of her working water, running pots, clanging the rhythm of chopping vegetables. The other customers eventually left, the bell's chime marking their departure. 20 minutes later, Emma emerged with a bowl. She set it down, harder than necessary broth sloshing slightly. "Eat, then leave." Alexander looked down at the soup, the same chicken-vegetable recipe from that first night. Steam rose between them like a barrier. "I resigned from Pierce Global." Emma froze. "What?" "3 days ago. Walked into the boardroom, handed over my resignation, and transferred everything to James." He picked up his spoon. "Kept enough to live on, and my partnership here. That's it." "Alex, you can't. That's insane." "Is it?" He took a bite of soup, savoring it exactly as he had that first night. "Because it feels like the sanest decision I've made in 40 years. Emma sat down across from him, shock evident on her face. "Those 1,500 employees? We'll be fine. James is a better CEO than I ever was. The stock's already recovering because investors actually trust him." Alexander set down his spoon. "Turns out I was the problem, not the solution." "But your legacy?" "My legacy is sitting in his office right now, running that company with actual humanity. My legacy is learning that washing dishes beside someone I love matters more than any corporate achievement." He paused. "And my legacy is this restaurant, if you'll still have me as a partner." Emma's eyes glistened. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you were wrong." Alexander reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in old yellowed paper. "This is a drawing my son made for me 25 years ago. I never opened it because I was too busy building an empire." He slid it across the table. "Look at it." With shaking hands, Emma unwrapped the paper. The child's drawing made her breath catch 2 stick figures holding hands, love written in crayon innocence. "That's what I lost," Alexander said quietly. "Not because of you, because of choices I made long before we met. You didn't make me forget who I was supposed to be. You reminded me who I actually am underneath all the corporate armor." "Alex, I'm not finished." He pulled out his wallet, the same wallet he'd forgotten that first night, and turned it upside down over the table. Nothing fell out. "I have $43 in my checking account. I kept the penthouse for now because I signed a lease, but I'm moving out next month. I have no job, no corporate identity, no empire." He met her eyes. "I'm just a man who forgot his wallet again. And I'm hoping you'll still give me soup." Tears spilled down Emma's cheeks. "You're crazy." "Probably." Alexander smiled, that real smile she'd taught him. "But I'm also free. For the first time since I was 20 years old, I'm actually free." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of hers. "I don't need you to save me, Emma. I don't need you to sacrifice yourself to protect me. I just need you to believe that I'm here because this is where I want to be. Not because I'm running away, but because I'm finally running towards something that matters." Emma looked at him. Really looked. At the absence of designer labels, at the old coat he'd worn that first night, at eyes that held clarity instead of desperate escape. This wasn't a man in crisis. This was a man who'd made a choice and found peace in it. I was so scared, she whispered. Jennifer showed me those articles, those numbers, and I thought Jennifer was protecting what she understood. Money power, corporate reputation. Alexander's voice was gentle. She never understood that none of it meant anything if I was miserable. She thought I was having a midlife crisis. Maybe I was. But the crisis wasn't falling for you. It was realizing I'd spent 40 years living someone else's definition of success. What if you regret this? Emma's voice cracked. What if 6 months from now, you wake up and realize you gave up everything for love, for meaning, for actual happiness? Alexander leaned forward. Emma, I gave up things that were slowly killing me. That's not sacrifice, that's survival. Emma reached across the table, and this time their hands met in the middle. Her work-worn fingers wrapped around his, and they sat like that for a long moment. Two people who'd found each other through soup and second chances, learning to trust that what they'd built was real. I missed you so much, she said finally. I missed you too. He squeezed her hand gently. And I'm not going anywhere. Even if you tell me to leave, I'll just keep coming back for soup until you get tired of making it. She laughed through her tears. That could take a while. I make really good soup. I know. His eyes held warmth and certainty. Best soup I ever had. Changed my whole life. It was just chicken and vegetables. It was grace I didn't deserve. It was kindness without conditions. It was you seeing me when I'd forgotten how to see myself. He paused. That first night you told me to pay you back by helping someone worse off than me. Well, I was worse off than everyone. I was drowning in money and success and complete emptiness. You helped me. Now I'm paying it forward by becoming someone worthy of that help. Emma's other hand came up to cover their joined ones. You were always worthy, Alex. You just couldn't see it. I see it now. Thanks to you. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands clasped across the table in the empty diner winter light filtering through the windows. Finally, Emma took a shaky breath. So, what happens now? Now, Alexander stood slowly still, holding her hand. Now we figure out what our life looks like, together. No more running, no more sacrificing, no more letting other people define what we should want. That's simple. That's simple. He helped her to her feet. Unless you'd rather I finish this soup first. It's really good. Emma smiled, really smiled, for the first time in days. The soup can wait. The bell chimed. They turned to see Grace standing in the doorway, taking in the scene with cautious eyes. Mama, everything okay? Everything's perfect, baby. Emma didn't let go of Alexander's hand. Alex is back. I see that. Grace's expression was guarded. For how long? For good, Alexander said. If that's all right with you. I know I'm not Marcus and I'm not trying to replace him, but I love your mother and I'd like a chance to prove I'm worth keeping around. Grace studied him for a long moment, her protective instincts clearly at war with the hope she saw in her mother's eyes. You broke her heart when you let her walk away. I know. I'm sorry. You better not do it again. I won't. Alexander met her gaze steadily. I promise. Grace nodded slowly, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Okay then, but you're on probation. One screw up and I'm throwing you out myself. Fair enough. Alexander managed a small smile. I'm pretty good at washing dishes if you need help with the dinner shift. We'll see. But Grace was almost smiling now. Mama, I'll cover tonight. You two have some catching up to do. After Grace disappeared into the kitchen, Emma turned back to Alexander. The air between them felt different now, lighter, full of possibility instead of fear. I can't believe you actually did it, she said softly. Gave up everything. I didn't give up everything. I let go of what was killing me and held on to what gives me life. He gestured around the small diner. This place. You. The chance to build something that actually matters. Emma looked around her restaurant, the checkered tablecloths, the photographs of Marcus on the walls, the counter where she'd served thousands of meals. You know what Marcus used to say? What? He said a life well lived isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by how many people are better off because you existed. She looked back at Alexander. I think you're finally understanding that. I'm trying to. Alexander picked up his coat from the back of the chair. So, can I walk you home? We have a lot to talk about. Emma grabbed her red coat from the hook, the coat that had sat unworn for 3 days because wearing it hurt too much. She slipped it on, feeling its warmth surround her like a second chance. Actually, she said, I think I'd like that very much. They walked out into the falling snow side by side. Emma looked up at the faded yellow sign of her restaurant, the place Marcus had built with love, the place she'd nearly lost, the place that had brought Alexander into her life when she'd stopped believing in second chances. "Thank you," she whispered to the memory of her late husband, "for the recipe, for the love, for teaching me that good things are worth fighting for." Alexander glanced at her. "What was that?" "Nothing. Just saying goodbye to old ghosts." Emma smiled. "And hello to new beginnings." They walked home through the snow, two people who'd found each other through Soup and Grace, ready to build something neither had planned, but both desperately needed. No dramatic declarations, no grand gestures, just the quiet certainty of two people who'd finally figured out what mattered. A life lived with purpose, together. 6 months later, Emma's kitchen had transformed in subtle but significant ways. The same checkered tablecloths covered the tables, the same photographs lined the walls, but new energy filled the space. Lunch and dinner rushes now packed the small diner, with lines often stretching out the door. But the most significant change wasn't visible on any balance sheet. Alexander stood at the register, ringing up an elderly woman's order. "That'll be $8, Mrs. Chen." She counted out exact change slowly, her arthritic fingers fumbling with coins. "Such a nice young man," she said as she did every Tuesday. Alexander was 58, but he'd learned to accept the compliment gracefully. "You're too kind. See you next week." "Wouldn't miss it. Your soup gets better every time." As Mrs. Chen shuffled out, Grace appeared from the kitchen. "Alex, table 4 wants to know if we can do Marcus's meatloaf recipe for their anniversary dinner next month." "Let me check with the boss." Alexander called back to Emma, who was prepping vegetables at the counter. Can we do a private anniversary dinner?" Emma looked up, warmth in her eyes. She still marveled at how naturally he'd slipped into this life. No resentment, no looking back. "How many people?" "Just the couple," Grace answered. "They had their first date here 30 years ago." "Of course we can." Emma wiped her hands. "Tell them we'd be honored." This was the rhythm they'd found Alexander handling: front of house, Emma managing the kitchen, Grace coordinating everything. James stopped by twice a week for lunch, usually bringing colleagues who'd become curious about his father's retirement project. Under James's leadership, Pierce Global Holdings had actually increased in value, which seemed to delight the business press more than anyone expected. Jennifer had called once 3 months ago. The conversation had been brief. "You're really doing this," she'd said, not a question. "I really am," Alexander had confirmed. A long pause. "Are you happy?" "Yes." Another pause. "Good, that's good." She'd hung up before he could respond. The lunch rush finally slowed around 2. Alexander flipped the sign to closed for their afternoon break. Emma emerged from the kitchen exhausted but content. "Come here," Alexander said, gesturing to a booth. "Sit down before you fall down." "I'm fine. You've been on your feet for 6 hours. He guided her to the seat. "Let me at least get you some water." As he returned with water and a plate of the day's special she always forgot to eat during rushes, Emma watched him with quiet gratitude. This man who'd once commanded boardrooms now fussed over whether she'd had lunch. "I had an idea I wanted to run by you," Alexander said, sitting across from her. "Another idea. The last one involved expanding to catering, which nearly killed us during wedding season. This one's different." He pulled out his phone, showing her notes he'd been compiling. "Remember how you told me that first night to pay for my soup by helping someone worse off than me?" "Of course." "What if we made that official, like a program?" He scrolled through his notes. "Pay it forward Tuesdays. Anyone who can't afford their meal eats free, and anyone who wants to contribute puts money in a community jar. We use those funds to cover the free meals." Emma read through his detailed notes, her eyes widening. "Alex, this is beautiful. You think it'll work. I think it's exactly what Marcus would have wanted." She reached across and squeezed his hand briefly. "Let's do it." They launched Pay It Forward Tuesdays the following month. The response overwhelmed them. The community jar filled quickly, often with contributions from customers who'd once eaten for free themselves. Homeless individuals found not just food, but dignity. College students struggling between tuition and groceries found relief. Single parents working multiple jobs found support. Emma's kitchen became more than a restaurant. It became proof that kindness could be sustainable, that business and compassion weren't mutually exclusive. One Tuesday evening, as they were cleaning up after a particularly busy shift, Alexander found Emma standing by the window, staring out at the street. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "Marcus." Emma's voice was soft. "I was thinking he'd be so proud of what this place has become. You built something amazing here." "We built it." Emma turned to look at him. "You, me, Marcus's memory, all the people who walk through that door, believing in what we're doing. It's all connected." "Speaking of connected," Alexander reached into his pocket. "I have something for you." "Alex, if this is another piece of expensive jewelry you can't actually afford anymore." "It's not." He pulled out a small velvet box and Emma's breath caught. "Before you panic, I didn't spend a fortune. I actually made it." "You made it." "Well, I had help from a jeweler, but the design is mine." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver band with a small inscription inside, "Best soup ever." Emma laughed, her eyes immediately filling with tears. "You're proposing with a soup joke. I'm proposing with the truth." Alexander's expression turned serious. "That soup changed my life, Emma. You changed my life, and I don't want to spend another day without making it official." He paused. "I know I'm not the catch I used to be on paper. I'm just a guy who washes dishes and occasionally burns the toast. You burn the toast frequently." "Frequently burns the toast," Alexander amended with a slight smile. "But I love you. I love this life we've built. I love who I am when I'm with you. So, Emma Harris, will you marry me?" Emma looked at the ring, then at Alexander's face, open, hopeful, completely sincere. 6 months ago, she'd walked away from this man thinking she was saving him. Now, she understood he'd never needed saving. He'd needed exactly what she'd given him, that first night permission to be human. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Alexander slipped the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly. They stood there in the empty restaurant, hands clasped between them, surrounded by the tools of their trade and the life they'd chosen. 3 months later, they married in the restaurant on a Sunday morning. No fancy venue, no designer dress, no society pages. Just 50 people who mattered: James and his fiancée, Grace, and her son, Marcus Jr. Regular customers who'd become family, and a handful of Alexander's former colleagues who'd become actual friends. Emma wore her red coat over a simple white dress. Alexander wore the same old coat from that first night. The ceremony was brief, officiated by Emma's pastor, and concluded with everyone sharing bowls of Marcus's soup. James stood to give a toast. "I've known my father for 32 years, but I only really met him 6 months ago. He taught me something important these past months. Success isn't about what you acquire. It's about what you give away that actually enriches you." He raised his glass. "To Emma for teaching him that, and to both of you for showing the rest of us what actually matters." The celebration lasted into the evening. Alexander found himself at the register, still in his wedding clothes, serving soup to guests. Emma watched from across the room, her heart full. Grace appeared beside her. "You happy, Mama?" "Happier than I ever thought I'd be again." Emma squeezed her daughter's hand. "Your daddy would have liked him." "Yeah, he would have." Grace smiled. "Marcus always said the measure of a man isn't what he owns, but what he's willing to give up for love." Alex passed that test. As the guests filtered out, leaving just family, Alexander approached Emma. "I have one more surprise. I don't know if my heart can take more surprises today. You'll like this one." He led her to the wall of photographs, the ones showing Emma and Marcus through the years. "I had something made." He unveiled a new frame. Inside was the drawing from James, matted and preserved professionally. Below it, a small plaque read, "Legacy isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in moments that matter." Emma touched the frame gently. "It's perfect. We're hanging it right here," Alexander said, "so I never forget what actually matters. So anyone who walks in here sees that success isn't about money or power. It's about connection. It's about love. It's about being brave enough to choose people over profit." That night, after everyone left and they'd cleaned up together, Emma and Alexander stood in the middle of their restaurant, side by side. "You know what the best part is?" Emma said. "What's that?" "We get to do this every day. Wake up, come here, feed people, go home together. Just live." "Just live," Alexander repeated, marveling at the simplicity. For 40 years, he'd chased extraordinary. Now he'd found it in the ordinary, in dish soap, in checkered tablecloths, in the woman beside him who taught him that life's greatest luxury was being fully present for it. Outside, snow began to fall, the first snow of the season, exactly like that night months ago when a desperate man had stumbled into a small diner and found salvation in soup. Emma moved toward the door, ready to go home. "I am home," Alexander said quietly. Wherever you are, that's home. They locked up the restaurant, the yellow sign flickering above them like a beacon. As they walked away together, Emma looked back once. Through the window, she could almost see Marcus smiling from his photograph on the wall, approving of the life she'd built from his foundation, approving of the man who'd learned that true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with the courage to choose love. The snow fell softly around them as they disappeared into the Chicago night, two souls who'd found each other through grace, gratitude, and one unforgettable bowl of soup. And in that small diner with its checkered tablecloths and faded sign, a different kind of empire stood strong, not built on profits or power, but on kindness, second chances, and the revolutionary idea that happiness wasn't something you acquired. It was something you chose, every single day, together.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.